Now, the next part of our presentation is talking about MSStatsTMT. So let me start sharing my presentation. So as we have seen yesterday, and as we have seen today, so there are different ways of quantifying, of designing our experiments to obtain relative quantification of proteins. So yesterday we focused on label-free quantification, and either with data-dependent acquisition or data-independent acquisition, and so on. And so this morning we also saw that TMT was a really important workflow, which is part of massive quant, but it is also very frequently used in practice. So a more recent work in our group was working with MSSTATS, and specific version of MSSTATS is MSStatsTMT. And so I would like to highlight the work by Ting Huang, who is a senior PhD student in our group. So the plan is that I will do a short introduction to MSStatsTMT, and then Ting will do a live demo of the functionalities of MSStatsTMT in R. So just as a overview, well, there are many ways to go about relative protein quantification. So just as a summary, we talked about label-free quantification, or using labeled reference peptides, or maybe using either chemical or metabolic labeling. And so this is fine, but isobaric labeling gives us a different way of combining our samples for quantification. So we're actually mixing samples from different sources together, and the quantification occurs not at the level of MS1 spectra, but at the level of secondary MSMS spectra, where we quantify each sample using the intensities of the reporter ions in each MSMS spectrum. And this really changes the statistical properties of the resulting data. And this is why we could not just include TMT as another workflow in the base MSSTATS, but we actually had to start over and create a completely new package specifically designed for TMT data. And so there are many properties of the data which will be important to us. Part of that is that MSMS spectra, they are selected stochastically from MS1 peaks, which means that sometimes they can be selected from the top of the chromatographic peak and they will have really good quality. Sometimes they will be selected from the tail of the peak and they will be much more noisy. And then of course the samples are grouped together within one MSMS spectrum, but oftentimes our experiments include more samples or more conditions than can be accommodated by the channels in the MSMS spectrum. And so we also need to think about how we design an experiment where we mix samples from different origin more than once. And we have multiple such mixtures. And so then our goal is to integrate all the information across MSMS spectra, across reporter ions, but also across technical replicates and biological replicates to, at the end of the day, say if the protein is changing in abundance between pairs of conditions or not. So this is the focus of today. And so let me contrast a little bit the structure of the data as we have it in label-free experiments versus in label-based experiments. So what we did yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about the structure of data in a label-free experiment for one protein. So this is how we would view one protein. Here are the columns of this array is a mass spectrometry run, and the columns are grouped by subjects if these are technical replicate runs of the same subject, and then the subjects are grouped by conditions. And if it's a group comparison, then it means that we have different subjects in different condition. If it's a time course, then condition is a time, and then we have the same subject in multiple conditions. And we talked about the fact that the way that we actually do these experiments, we impose a restriction on randomization in the sense that we don't acquire this value of the intensity and then this one and then go back to this, but we only randomize the pink part of this data structure, but then all the column, the yellow part, all the features of the same run are acquired simultaneously. And therefore, whatever artifacts happen at this run in terms of, I don't know, day of data collection or operator or batch of material. So this affects all the features from this run simultaneously. So this type of data structure actually is becoming even more complicated when we talk about TMT, because now one run does not have just one subject, but it has multiple subjects and multiple conditions within the mixture. So this is how we think about, within MSSTATS framework, this is how we think about TMT version of the experiments. So the top level, before it was conditioned, but now the top level is actually a mixture, because mixture is what can be randomized when we collect the data, right? So here we will randomize subjects and conditions in label-free. In label-based, we will actually randomize the order in which we profile different mixtures. And so now there are complications, because the mixture can be profiled once on mass spectrometry, but it can also be profiled multiple times. So we can very well acquire technical replicates of the same mixture, and we can do it together. We can do it in a randomized manner. And so now each mixture and each replicate contains multiple conditions. And again, this can be complicated. We can have as many distinct conditions as channels and as reporter ions. Or maybe, let's say we have half the number of conditions. Let's say we have 10 reporter ions and we have 5 conditions, in which case we will have 2 biological or technical replicates of each condition. So then our mixture combines biological and technical replicates. What is very common, though, is that then we would also have multiple mixtures if we have more biological replicates than if we have number of reporter ions. And so this means that in terms of restriction of randomization, we now have additional restrictions. So multiple conditions are now profiled together within a run. And so whatever artifacts happen to this run, again, in terms of temperature or operator or batch of material, it will affect all of these conditions simultaneously, and it will also affect all of the features which we collect within this run simultaneously. So this means that we need to work differently with the type of experimental designs that we have with TMT as opposed to label-free. And of course, all the same problems as in label-free remain, such as missing values, such as some interferences and outliers, and so on. And also the fact that we need to normalize potentially between different runs, just like in label-free. However, the problems are also exacerbated because now we may very well have not just individual missing values between runs, but a same feature, which is an MS-MS spectrum, can be mapped to a peptide in one run or one mixture, but it will be completely missing in another run. So we have a lot more severe patterns of missing values than in label-free experiments. And so this creates challenges for the downstream statistical analysis. So this is how we go about that. So this is our usual view of the experimental design and data analysis for any type of workflow. And so this is what it means now for MSstatsTMT. So first of all, at the stage of the design, we have many options of allocating conditions to mixtures and replicates to mixtures. We are particularly interested in experiments when every replicate cannot fit in one mixture, and we need to acquire data in multiple mixtures. And of course, being statisticians, we would like to emphasize that it is extremely important to have biological replicates, because we cannot make valid conclusions and extrapolate them to the underlying populations without biological replicates. Occasionally, we also, for various reasons, it is useful to have technical replicates. So as we develop tools which we hope to be useful in a variety of circumstances, we need to have methods which can handle all of that. So this is really on the biological side of experimental design. Now, also on the technical side of experimental design, we need to make sure that we can, at the end of the day, compare the quantities we're interested in comparing. And we advocate using a reference channel. So in every mixture and in every run, dedicate at least one channel which has some kind of reference mixture. The important property of this reference mixture is that it does not have biological variation. So it has exactly the same content across different runs. So if there is some variation in the intensity of this channel, it cannot reflect the biological variation. It has to reflect technological artifacts. And so it informs us of these artifacts, and we will be using this to correct for them at the stage of normalization. Now, there are methods which can analyze the data without this reference channel, but these methods require additional assumptions. And since we hope to develop a tool which can be used in a variety of circumstances, we believe that this will give us the best statistical practice throughout. And also there was a question about fractionation. Yes, we can handle fractionated experiments as well. And so I will talk about this in a minute. So this is what happens at the stage of the experimental design. And so once the data are acquired, data processing is a very important step. And so as we discussed yesterday, we work with a variety of tools which take as input raw spectra and detect peaks and quantify the peaks and identify the peaks. So in this case, since quantification is done at MSMS level, so we need to work with tools which are designed for that. And so we have now converters which work with Proteome Discover, MaxQuant, OpenMS, and SpectraMine. So in the case, for example, of MaxQuant, we would take the output files generated by MaxQuant, and we will format the data, we will extract the right information, and we will format the data in a way that is readable by MSSTATS. I know that in massive quant now, so there is also a way to extract reporter ion intensity and format them directly into the MSSTATS format. Proteome Discover, it's also very nice. So we have been working with Thermo extensively. And so this summer at ASMS, we were going to present a scripting node, which allows us to essentially format the output of Proteome Discover, again, in a way which will allow us to run MSSTATS. So this is also quite nice. And just like in the original label-free version of MSSTATS, we use converters not only for formatting, but we also use them to essentially pre-process and pre-clean the data, so to maximize our ability to model this data downstream. So we usually remove shared peptides, meaning that if peptide can belong to multiple proteins, as of right now, we remove those so that each protein is quantified based on unique peptides only. Now, if you have multiple MSMS spectra, which are mapped, so if you have the spectra which have many missing reporter ions, it usually means that the spectrum is not very good quality. So we also have filters which require that within an MSMS spectrum, you need to observe at least some number of reporter ions so that the spectrum is usable for us. Then if we have multiple PSMs, so multiple MSMS spectra, which are identified as having the same peptide sequence and the same charge, so our filtering takes the quote-unquote best PSM for this peptide ion. Again, as I mentioned earlier, remember some of those spectra are selected for fragmentation at the top of the chromatographic peak, sometimes at the tail. So usually the best peaks, they maximize the chance that the spectrum was selected from a high position in the peak. And so best PSM we define as its average intensity, number of missing values, and also if a tool provides interference score, we take this into account. And then combining fractions. So the way we go about that, so this type of data structure, these features, they can come from multiple fractions. So we just concatenate all the features which correspond to this particular protein across multiple fractions. Now, if it so happens that a feature is so the same peptide ion is present in multiple fractions, so we just keep the feature from the fraction where it has, again, quote unquote, best quality. And the best quality is determined as highest mean intensity over all the reporter ions. And if you have multiple features which have the same, we also look at the maximum intensity. So no complicated modeling, we just use some common sense rules essentially to combine data across the fractions. So just maybe answer real quick, is this TMT workflow suitable to SPS data? Yes. So certainly, and so you can use MS2, you can use MS3 spectra, so our features will be reporter ions at the whatever level you would like to have. So, okay, and now the next step is really where our work, our statistical work really begins, is how we go about combining all this evidence through this data structure into some conclusions at the protein level. And so we need to account for the fact that different runs can have global artifacts, such as in one run, the intensity went up for the entire run, and the next run it went down. So we want to normalize for that. But also we want to account for the fact that in different runs, we may actually work with very different PSMs, so very different features, which have different average intensity, and so they're not directly comparable. How can we also account for this type of artifacts? So we use 4 steps, and in fact, many methods which deal with TMT data have some version of these 4 steps. And so one is some kind of normalization at the spectrum level, some kind of summary at the protein level, then some kind of normalization at the protein level, and then of course statistical modeling and model-based conclusions. So the way MSstatsTMT goes about that is we start with a spectrum level normalization. So here, this would be the type of plot we will look at the beginning. So here, each box is a run. Each box plot inside corresponds to a particular channel. And values inside each box plot, these are all the reporter ion intensities over all the features, all the proteins, everything in this particular run. And so at this stage, we make the assumption, which is the same assumption which we would use, for example, for DIA experiments, where we say, well, overall, these are all the proteins in this particular sample. We assume that the average abundance of the protein is roughly stable across channels, meaning across biological replicates and conditions, and also across runs. And this essentially assumes that we expect that only a small number of proteins, or a relatively small proportion of proteins, is actually changing in abundance as compared to the overall number of proteins which we quantify in this experiment. And so we apply global median normalization at the spectrum level. And so the result is that the boxes are now equal in their medians. So the second step is protein summarization. And so now our job is to integrate all of these features. So this will be a type of plot that we'll look at this stage. So here, each gray line is the series of reporter ion intensities of PSMs mapped to one particular protein across reporter ion channels. So this corresponds to one protein. So before, these were all the proteins in the experiment. Now we work with one protein at a time. And so we have different features, so different PSMs in one run, some other features in the second run, and some other features in the third run. And we see that there are differences in intensity of these features, well, in large part because these are not the same peptide ions in run 2 and run 3. And so their ionization efficiency is not the same. And so we don't deal with this at that stage. So all we do is separately for each run, we will summarize these intensities on the log scale. By the way, I forgot to mention, this is, we take the log transformation right away. And so we summarize the feature intensities on the log scale separately for each run. And so we obtain a representative summary. And in fact, for this step, we use exactly the same code and the same procedure as we use for label-free MSSTATS, because this can be thought of as an instance of label-free MSSTATS, meaning that we use robust summarization so that we do not, so that the summarization is not affected by outliers. And if there are individual missing values, for example, here, we assume that they are missing for reasons of low abundance. Again, keep in mind that this is done already after we filtered out spectra of poor quality, spectra with low intensities, and so on. So the number of missing values is fairly low at this stage. So this censoring step actually plays a fairly minor role in this summarization, but the robustness is really important so that we still become relatively robust to outliers. So this is the second step. So now we have a summary, but again, a summary is still not comparable between the runs because we may be summarizing different peptide ions between the runs. And so the next step for us is to actually make things comparable between the runs. And this is where the reference channel is really important. So because we have different PSMs, so here I'm showing this big dot. These are two reference channels in this particular example that we have for this protein. And so we see that these dots, they can have slightly different locations between the runs because we work with different PSMs in different runs. And we know that the reference channels are not supposed to have any biology, so we expect the reference channels to be equal between runs. And so this step actually equalizes the reference channels between the runs and applies the same shifts to all the endogenous intensities of reporter ions across the runs. So now this is what we have. So we have data where we first did global normalization between runs just to adjust for some technological artifacts between the runs. Then we summarized the features into one number per protein per run. And then we counted the fact that for this particular protein, we work with different PSMs. So we further had a local normalization. We call it local normalization when it's separate for each protein. And so we applied the local normalization so that for this particular protein, now values are comparable between the runs. So this is the part now where we need to do statistical analysis. And so the challenges of statistical analysis are, in the big scheme of things, the same as for label-free. We need to make sure we represent the experimental design accurately. We need to make sure that the peak intensities are processed and summarized appropriately. And then we need to make sure that variance components are estimated accurately, and then our conclusions are representing the full variation in the data. And so this is what we set out to do. And so as I mentioned earlier, we now have restrictions on randomization which come from two sources. One, because the samples are pooled together into a mixture, and so whatever happens to the mixture happens simultaneously to all the conditions and all the biological replicates in this mixture. And also all the features are acquired simultaneously within this mixture. And so in the level of, in the language of statistical literature, this type of double restriction on randomization has a name. So it's called a split plot experimental design. And this type of designs have fairly complicated linear mixed effects models, which are well known. And so what we're doing, we're applying this type of models to this structure. But just like yesterday in label-free, we realize that when we have complicated model, it can fail for complicated reasons. So oftentimes variance components are difficult to estimate. There are all manners of difficulties. And so at the same time, we can also learn from this model that if we only want to compare conditions, then the comparison between conditions only depends on the summaries of all the features, and it does not depend on the individual features. So therefore, we can take our summary, which I just described, where we have normalized and summarized values, and we can simplify the model in a way which is similar to the way that we simplify this for label-free. So we still have to account for the fact that we have samples which come together in a mixture, and some data points come together in a technical replicate, and others come from different technical replicates. We're interested in comparing conditions. We have biological replicates, which are an important source of variation, but now this model is much simpler than this model. And so it allows us to do things which are much more stable and much more robust because we work with the summaries. And so what is useful to work with this general statistical framework is that now that we understand what is the usual pattern of analysis of this type of designs, we can very easily adapt this to other designs. So for example, what if I don't have technical replicates? I only have biological replicates. Or what if I have an unbalanced design? Or what if I have a controlled mixture which doesn't have biological variance, it only has technical variance? So it is very clear how we can adapt these models. And so what MSstatsTMT is doing in the background, it parses the experimental design from the annotation file, and it sees what type of design we have and fits the appropriate subset of this full model that is appropriate for a particular data experiment and sometimes for a particular protein. And another thing which we add here, because currently TMT experiments still use a fairly small number of runs traditionally, so empirical Bayes variance moderation is something which is very popular. It has been popular for a good 15 years or so. Now it was developed first in the Limma package for gene expression. So this package has an interesting technique where it learns the amount of variation, not only for one protein at a time, but also across all the proteins. And it uses this to improve our estimate of variation for individual proteins. So we don't use Limma, but we just use this particular method from Limma, and we implemented this in our own implementation in MSstatsTMT as well. And of course, the last part, as we always argue, it is making sure that we learn from this experiment to do better future experiments. And so this means sample size calculation functionality, and also making sure that the data are available for others to learn or reanalyze or question. And so this is where we work with Massive Quant, and it has been very useful to us. So this is the end of my discussion of MSstatsTMT. I would like to extend a big thank you in particular to our colleagues at Roche and Genentech, because their conversations with their labs were a really big inspiration for the development of MSstatsTMT. So let me see if I can answer a couple of questions, and then the next step would be for Ting to do a live demo with MSstatsTMT, but I will continue answering questions in writing. But let me maybe answer a couple of questions right now. So what is a reference channel? Do you mix samples across all conditions to get a reference channel? Do you use 2 channels for reference? So from our perspective, it can be anything as long as it's stable, so does not have biological variation between the runs. It can be a mix of multiple conditions. It can be some other sample. A mix of multiple conditions is beneficial because it will ensure that most proteins have a large enough abundance so that the reference channel has a high enough intensity of the reporter ion. So this also helps because it increases the chance of this corresponding MS1 peak to be selected for fragmentation at the MS2 or MS3 level. However, if you have heard the talk by Bernard Kuster last week at the May Institute, he also had some words of advice for that. For example, if the reference channel is very abundant, it essentially leaks the intensities to other channels, and it may compromise your ability to accurately quantify the reporter ions in the channels you are interested in. So there has to be some care on the experimental side on how you design the reference channel. I invite you to look at the talk of Bernard Kuster, which is now on YouTube from the main page of the May Institute. How do you apply MSstatsTMT if you have just one mixture and no reference channel? Well, the good news is that if you have one mixture and one run, you don't need to do between run normalization, right? And the reference channel is useful primarily to normalize between the runs, right? So how we have it here. So if you have only one run, well, you don't really need to do the between run normalization. If you do have multiple runs, but these runs are technical replicates, so then the assumption can be that the protein abundance is the same across all the runs, which is a fair assumption if the runs are technical replicates of the same mixture. So then you can create a quote unquote pseudo reference by, for example, taking the sum or the mean of the median of all the intensities, endogenous intensities across all the channels. But then you have to be careful because you can essentially overfit your data. So we think that it is best statistical practice to use some external information for this type of normalization. And working without reference channel is not appropriate when you have different runs have different biological replicates, and in particular, if different runs have conditions mixed in different proportions. So if your run 1 has more healthy and run 2 has more disease, it is not a good idea to assume that the proteins are constant between the runs, because then you are removing some of the actual signal. So let's see, why normalize by reference channel at the protein level and not at the PSM level, since intensity depends on stochastic sampling? So we prefer to do it at the protein level because we think that this is where the help from a reference channel is needed most. So when we do it at the spectrum level, we can make another assumption, which is not that much of a stretch, which says that the overall proteome is roughly constant between the runs. So essentially at the spectrum level, we can make an assumption which does not yet use the reference channel, which is a fairly mild assumption, which is used in label-free experiments. And this allows us already to correct the run-specific artifacts. And so we find that this is good enough. And so then we use the reference channel where I think it's needed most to account for the fact that we have different PSMs for the same protein. This means that we will learn different shifts for different proteins, right? So for some proteins, we can have some changes between the runs, and for another protein, it will be something else, because the nature of PSMs between runs is different for different proteins. Do you suggest any imputation for missing values after filtering? So as I mentioned, we use filtering to remove PSM with many missing values. So what can happen easily, for example, here we have missing values for this PSM and this mixture, but then it is present in this mixture, right? Or we have present values here, but missing values in the next run. So those type of things we leave missing. So the only thing we will impute is a situation like this, where the PSM is present, most of the values are present, and we just have one missing reporter ion. But as I mentioned, the situations are fairly rare, so it is still useful somewhat, but I would say that the impact of this type of imputation is much less pronounced than it would be in label-free. Now, we do not impute anything when the entire PSM or entire feature is missing completely in the run. So this is where reference channel is used to account for differences between that. So I think that in the interest of time, I will probably leave the other questions and I will try to answer them in writing. So I would now pass the virtual microphone to Ting, who is going to present the demo of MSstatsTMT. And so let me introduce Ting briefly. So Ting is a PhD student in our group, in computer science at Northeastern University, and MSstatsTMT is one of the topics of Ting's PhD dissertation. So thank you, Ting, for doing the demo.
Thank you, Professor Vitek. Hi, everyone. I'm Ting, the main developer of MSstatsTMT. I think in the last 1 hour, we will go over the demo about how to use MSstatsTMT. So let me first share my screen. Okay. So let's first start from the course material. If we go to the May Institute website, and we can see today's class, which is May 6th. And if we open documents here, we can see all the material for today's lecture. First is we want to download the material for the demo, which is here, materials, download here. And it will direct us to the Google Drive folder. And we will use, this folder is what we will use today for our demo. Let's first download it. I think I should go to, let's download the MSstatsTMT folder. Okay. And then open it. Okay, let's see. There are some questions. I will. I think I will answer the question. There we have several some questions. I will answer the questions after we. Let's see. Let's first download the folder and unzip it. After we unzip it, we open the folder. In the folder, we provide two data sets. First is the proteome discover TMT output, and second is the massive quant TMT output. Due to the time reason, today we will only go over the proteome discoverer output. But if you have the MSQuant data, you can look at the MSQuant tutorial, and it detailed each step how to use MSstatsTMT for MSQuant output. Let's first open the HTML file for proteome discover. It's a proteome discover HTML file. And then, so in today's tutorial, we are going to do the following steps. First is most important is when we have our user many user feedback about MSstatsTMT. I think one difficulty the user often have is how to make a correct annotation file for MSstatsTMT. Just as what Dr. Vitek said in her lecture, MSstatsTMT data is more complex than the label-free data because we have additional structure, which is the channel and the mixture. So, which also give us a little more difficulty to make the annotation file. Then in this demo tutorial, we will spend some time to explain how to make a correct annotation file. Then after we have the annotation file, the next step is we are ready to use the MSstatsTMT. Current MSstatsTMT, it can accept different, current MSstatsTMT, it accepts the output file from different tools. Mainly now it supports 4 tools. First is Proteome Discoverer. Also, as Dr. Vitek mentioned, like I think in the next version of Proteome Discoverer, it will provide the MSstatsTMT scraping node. In their scraping node, you even didn't need to write any script. But you'll still need to tell Proteome Discoverer what the annotation information the dataset has. Then it will call MSstatsTMT internally. So, but we also support MSQuant and the SpectrumMan, which is a sibling software for Spectrum node, and also OpenMS. So if you have the output from those 4 software, you can directly get the PSM level data and also have the annotation file. So, and have the prepared annotation file, then you are ready to use MSstatsTMT. In the MSstatsTMT, main step is normalization. We have 2 normalization, and then we have summarization, protein summarization, and finally, we have the statistical testing part. The dataset we are going to use in this demo is, I think Professor Vitek just briefly mentioned, is a specking dataset. This specking dataset is, we have 48 UPS1 protein, and we spec in the 48 protein into the select labeled HeLa background, but with different concentration. The number you see here actually is the group. It's also the specking concentration. It's a relative specking concentration. 1 means the largest concentration, and 0.125 means the smallest concentration. So we spec in with 4 different concentration and with 2 replicates. As you see, each row here is each MS1, and there are two replicates for each concentration, and then we will totally have 8 replicates. So we also, in order, like we want to make the design balance for the reason, then we have 2 left channel, we make them as a reference channel. We have 2 reference channel and 8 replicates. So there are totally 10 replicates. Then and then they are labeled by the 10-plex TMT. We mix, and then we mix them and pass to the mass spectrometer. So this is one mixture. In order to measure the technical variance, we will each mixture here will be profiled by 3 mass spectrometry runs. As you see, each mixture here it has 3 MS runs. And all the 3 runs, their difference is they are the same mixture, but they pass the mass spectrometry 3 times. So then we prepare 5 such mixtures. And all the difference between the mixture is the, so I think there are 5 mixtures, and the mixtures, they are, the difference is with the channel, the label we use to label the replicates are different. Here, because it's back in the data set, so we couldn't expect much biological variance between different replicates because most of the background proteins are constant. And then we will use this data set as our example data set to run MSSTMT. But since this data set has around like 4,500 proteins, if we run MSSTMT on all the analysis, it may take maybe 1 hour for all the analysis. I think for the time reason, I select only 50 proteins from the whole data set, and run it as an example for our following demo. Here is, I think we have a question is why this dataset uses 2 reference channels. Actually, this dataset, you can use 1 reference channel, but for this dataset, because we have 4 conditions and each condition has 2 replicates, then we leave 2 channels empty. So that at that time we decided to use 2 reference channels. And in our evaluation, we found, of course, in our normalization, if you have 2 normalization reference channel, we will average them. And we found that after average them, we have like a little bit, not a lot, like very a lot, but a little bit better reference. But it makes sense because you kind of balance the 2 reference channel. But if you have you use only 1 reference channel, it still works for MSSTMT. Okay. And then let's go to the how to use MSSTMT. First step is we need to install MSSTMT from Bioconductor. Now MSSTMT is available in Bioconductor. So since Bioconductor they recently updated to the new version, MSSTMT also updated to the new version, which is 1.6.0. But it's fine if you don't have 1.6.0. You can also use 1.4.6, which is the same as the 1.6.0. Both versions works for this tutorial. So after you installed MSSTMT, we also need the other 2 package, which is just for our data manipulation, which is tidyr and dplyr. So let's start the demo. Let's see. We can also, let's open the RMD file, which is our proteome discover output RMD file. Let's open it in RStudio. So first is we want to download MSSTMT. I already downloaded, but if you you haven't downloaded, you can use the code I annotated to download it. Please let me know if you think the font size is too small for you to see it. I can make it larger. So after you install it, after you installed MSSTMT from Bioconductor, we need to first library it, load it into RStudio. So now we load the MSSTMT into RStudio. Yeah, you can. So we can use the question mark MSSTMT to see what functions MSSTMT provide. After you tap it, you can see the help file for MSSTMT. Let's see what the main function MSSTMT provide. First is the different converter for different software. We have a question. Okay, the question is, do we need to install MSSTATS prior to install MSSTMT? The answer is no, we don't need it. We don't need to install MSSTATS for the analysis of MSSTMT. You only need to install MSSTMT. The reason why I also use another two packages is just for our tutorial. But if you want to run analysis using MSSTMT, you only need to install MSSTMT. So as you see here, there are different converter for different software. PD to MSSTMT is the converter we provide for proteome discover output, and a massive count converter for massive count output, and SpectralMan. I think there is a very recently we add a new converter for OpenMS. And then where is the most important function is the important function is protein summarization. In this function, we will MSSTMT will perform normalization and the protein summarization. The output of this function is a normalized protein data. So I think some attendee also ask if they don't have the output from those full softwares, can they manually, can they also use MSSTMT? The answer is yes, you can still use it. What you need to do is this protein summarization, it has a required input format. You can manually change your data to the required format of protein summarization and run it. Which means you don't need to run the converter and directly run the protein summarization. After we run the protein summarization, we will have the normalized protein data. So the next step is we will do the testing, which is the last function, group comparison function. In this function, we can test for the differential abundant proteins between conditions. Similar like MSSTATS, we also provide different visualization tools. So you can see how the normalized protein data looks like. Then let's start from the so I think we have a question about, okay, that's the inference step. Okay, I think the question is about the comparison metric in the which is required for the group comparison function. I will explain it later, I think when we go over the group comparison function. For the question is, one thing I think different from between MSSTATS and MSSTMT is, in MSSTMT, if you just simply want to compare any two groups between among all the groups, so which is also called pairwise comparison, you don't need to give contrast as MSSTATS. You can just tell the function that I want to do pairwise comparison, and MSSTMT will automatically internally generate all the pairs and give you the output. So first is we want to see, as I mentioned, protein summarization function. It has a required input, which has the following columns, like protein name, protein sequence, charge, channel, condition, bioreplicates, mixture, and intensity. If you don't have the output like from the converter, where MSSTMT supports, you can manually format your data to this format. Protein name, as you see, is just the protein name, and the peptide sequence is the peptide sequence. It can be modified or not modified. And charge is the charge of the precursor. And the PSM, basically, we see just the combination of peptide sequence and charge. So channel is just a channel, and the condition, bioreplicates, and mixture. Last is intensity. One thing you probably want to pay attention is the intensity here is the original scale, not log2 scale. So you don't need to log2 transform it. MSSTMT will do it. So here is just an example of the input to the protein summarization function. As the protein name and the peptide sequence, charge, and mixture, technical replicates, mixture, run, channel condition. So but if you have like the output from protein discoverer or MSQuant, then it's good that you don't need to worry about how to generate this file. MSstatsTMT provides the converter. In this tutorial, we will focus on the protein discoverer output. In protein discoverer, the file what we need is the PSM level report from protein discoverer. I think when you output a file from protein discoverer, there is different option: peptide file, protein file, PSM file. What we need is the PSM file. So in this dataset, I provide like in the data folder. Let's see here. We provide example dataset from protein discoverer, which is a PSM and TXT. Let's first read it into our studio. And then after we read it, we can let's see what columns the PSM file has. That's the columns PSM file has. As you see, it has different, like some important column is first is, as you see, abundance and the channel name. These columns contain the intensity data. And also we want to know, and also we see master protein accession and the protein accession. They contain protein accession is a protein name, master protein accession is a master protein name. The difference between them is protein accession, it may have protein groups, but master protein accession, it will select one representative protein from the protein groups based on their criteria. And then I think another important column is what we need is the is the peptide sequence column, which is annotated sequence. We also want to have is the charge, as the precursor charge column. So after we have, as you notice, this input is different from what we required for protein summarization function. Then what we need is to convert this input to this required format. That's what the converter does. Before we have the data file from protein discoverer, but we still need is annotation file. We need to tell, because our final objective is to perform testing. Then we need to tell MSStatsTMT what the different channel, what's the condition of each channel, and what's the biological information of each channel. So in order to run it, we want to in the PD converter, it requires MSstatsTMT needs two input file. First is the PD output, PSM output we already have. Second is annotation file. Then what is the annotation file we need? Let's see the example of annotation file I already made. It's also provided in the data folder, PD annotation file. That's the final annotation we need. Let's just see how what does it look like. So, okay, in the annotation file, we need 7 columns. First column is the run, which is the MS run ID. This run ID must same. Sorry, where is it? Okay. This run ID, it must same as spectral file column in the PD output. In PD output, let's see what this looks like. spectral file. That's what's the PD spectral file column. It gives you the spectral file ID. And based on this spectral file ID, we can know how many MS runs in the dataset. So if we check the unique value in the spectral file column, there are 15. There are 15 runs. So we want to have the annotation information for all the 15 runs. Then go back to the annotation file. We see this run information, it must be same as the spectral file. After we have this information must extract from the spectral file column, then we need to, next step is we need to give information to annotate the each run. Because we know the MS run, it can be a fraction of one mixture. It also can be a technical replicate of one mixture, or it can be just one mixture if there's no technical replicates or no fraction. Then for each run, we also have 10 channels. Each channel is a replicate. We also want to tell that what's the condition information and the biological information of each channel. So in order to generate this file, we will have, so we will need to have two steps. First step is we first need to two separate parts. First is we want to annotate it each run. As you see here, we have each run, and then we need to tell based on the run information, we need to tell is it a fraction, or is a technical replicate, or it's just a mixture. And this is the information we need to fill in. At the same time, within each mixture, we know that we have one TMT mixture. No matter we may have like several fractions or several technical replicates for the TMT mixture, but all the fractions or technical replicates for the same mixture, they have the same condition and bioreplicates information. Which means we need to, when we set annotation information, we only need to do it for each mixture, each channel. So what I mean here is we have mixture, we have channel, we need to fill in the bioreplicate column and the condition column. So how can we do that? First step, we need to extract the run information from the PD output. As what we have done before, we need to extract the unique run ID from PD output, which is runs. Okay. So we know that there are 15 runs. There are 15 runs. We need to give the annotation information for each run. So we make it as a, what we do is we make it as a, we make a table which has all the information. So we have the run information, we just extract from PD output, and all these three columns are empty, and we want to fill in the three columns. What we can do is we first write it as a table, as an Excel table in the data folder, under the data folder. So if we go to the data table, data folder, we can see there's a file called run information. After we open the run information, we have the run information is here, and then mixture, technical replicates, and fraction are empty. So first is, what's the mixture? Mixture is the TMT mixture. In our example data set, one mixture has 3 technical replicates. The run ID tells us. So the run ID tells us the mixture, which mixture it comes from. Mixture 3 and 0_3 means this run is from mixture 3, and this run is the 3rd technical replicate of mixture 3. Because we don't have any fraction in this data set, so then we can set fraction F1 everywhere, like you see. We can give the same fraction ID everywhere because we don't have a fraction. You can also use like 1 or any others, but make sure they are the same. For this data set, we don't have fraction. And then like the second column is we know it's this run is from mixture 4 and the technical replicates 2. So we can just fill in each row based on the run information. That's how we give the run ID when we run the mass spectrometry. But you can also have other way to name the run. So after we fill in all the columns, run annotation is done. So for time reason, I already fill in, I'll profile another file, which already fill in everything. It's a run info field. That's in the file, I fill in everything. So, and then after we fill in it, we can read we can read the file into MSSTATS, into RStudio. So we read the CSV file as the run info field because we filled the run information. And then here is the information we filled. So what the idea here is we first generate an empty table, and then we manually fill in the run information from the Excel and read in again to the RStudio. Now we have all the run information. Again, it's mixture is the TMT mixture ID. So one mixture may have different multiple technical replicates ID, and one mixture also may have different multiple fractions. So if there are multiple fractions, then this fraction should be corresponding to the, if it's, for example, if the second run is the second fraction, then you can put the F2 here to indicate it's a fraction. That's how MSSTMT know if there are fraction or if there is technical replicates. Inside MSSTMT, we will automatically detect if the fraction column, it has the one single value, which means there's no fraction. If the TMT technical replicates mixture column has one single value, which means this data set doesn't have technical replicates. And if the mixture one has column has one single value, it means, okay, we know there's only one single mixture in the data set. This will give us this indicate the design of the data set. And for different experimental design, MSSTMT will fit a different linear model. So I think previously there's a question is how the decision tree is, how the decision tree in MSSTMT to decide the design. What we have done is, as I said, detect if there are unique value, if it's one single value in fraction column or in technical replicates column or in mixture column. Based on this, we will fit a different linear model. After we have the run information, as I mentioned before, we also need to annotate each channel. This is just run information. How about the real biological information, which is our interest? We want to know which channel belongs to which condition. Then next step, again, similar thing, we will create an empty table, and then you can fill in it manually. So for this empty table, what we need? we need the run information again from the, sorry, let's see. We need the run information again from the proteome discover PD output. From the PD output, we can tell this abundance column, always abundance, the PD use like abundance, and the channel ID column contains the intensity data. And we know in this data set, we have 10 channels. That's the channel ID we need. So we need to save this channel ID. I think someone also asked if what if we have 16 channels, like 16 plex? Then you can, when you read the PD output or massive count output, you can see like there are 16 channels. And what you need to do is just save the 16 channel name. MSstatsTMT can deal with like any number of channels, 8, 10, 11, 16, it all works. So we first want to save this 10 channels, 10 channel ID. Let's save the 10 channel ID, which is corresponding to the column, abundance column in PD. After we have the 10 channel, we know each mixture have 10 channel. So then we need to create a table which corresponding to each mixture, each channel. So next step, what's the channel? How many mixtures in the data set? We see all, we want to know we will have the unique mixture information from the run information table you just fill in, just created. Here is the run information. In the run information, we know how table, we know, okay, we have 5 mixtures. Then we have 5 mixtures, each mixture has 10 channels, then we need to totally have 50 biological replicates. Then we need to give the group information for these 50 biological replicates. So first is we want to create an empty table. Again, this is the code to create an empty table. If we see, that's the empty table. This empty table, we have channel, we have mixture, but the condition and column are empty. And this table has 50 rows because we have 5 mixtures and each mixture has 10 channels. We need to fill in the condition information for the 50 biological replicates. Again, we want to output it as a CSV file. So we also output it under the data proteome TMT folder. If we go to the folder, we can see there is a CSV file called group info CSV. Okay, and this is the empty condition and empty biological replicates. What you need to do is to fill in the condition information and the biological information. What's the difference is biological replicates means like we may have, sometimes we may have different sample from same patient. This biological replicates is a subject ID. If for example, the first 3 channel, it has 3 replicates, but from same patient, then put the patient ID, same patient ID here. For time, to save the time, I also prepared a field table. And again, if you can find it as a group info field. If you open it, you can see the condition and the biological information has already been filled. Two things here to know, you want to know is first, we may have normalized reference channel for normalization. Then what we have to do is to tell, if for example, the first replicate here is normalization channel. And then you need to put norm under condition and the bio replicates. And sometimes you may also have empty channel. like if you don't have enough replicates, then you can put empty under these two columns. So after we fill in it, let's read it into MSSTATS RStudio. That's the, when read it, we have it, the information. Next step is very simple. We just need to combine the two tables we fill in by the join function in R. So you can just use it, don't need to change it. And then after we join it, oh, sorry, I forgot to library. Let's see. We need to library the two package. That's where we need this two package, because when the full join function is from the tidyr. So after we library the two package, let's join it. This two table will join by mixture. And then we can see what the table looks like. That's exactly the annotation table we want. Now we already have the annotation table. So which actually you already you are really ready to use MSSTMT. That's almost the most difficult part to use MSSTMT is how to set up the table. Two parts. First is set a run table, and then set a group information table. Finally, use full join to combine them. Next step, okay, we can go to the converter. We have the required input of converter. That's how it works. Let's see what the converter have. PD converter is PD to MSSTMT format. Input is the PSM output from PD. Annotation is the annotation file you just generated. And then you have also option is what's the protein ID you want to use, because usually like the tools, the pre-processing tools like PD or MSQuant, they provide like multiple protein ID option. Usually is one is the protein group ID, one is the master protein ID column. Here the default is a protein accession, which use protein group ID. And there are also some options. You can look at it after the tutorial. Now let's run the converter. It's quite simple. Just tell the converter the PD output file, raw PD, and the annotation file you just generated, and run it. So see, inside the converter, it will remove shared peptides, or if like within each run, one spectra, it has only one or two intensities, we will remove that spectra, because even inside the protein summarization, we can impute it, but if the existing value is too small, we couldn't impute it. And also, one thing interesting here is if you have fractions, multiple fractions, in this data set we don't have, but if you have multiple fractions in the you indicated in the annotation file, then this converter will combine the fractions inside internally. How it combine it? Now it's relatively simple way. So for each mixture, we have multiple fractions. And the converter will check, is there any peptide or precursor which is shared by multiple fractions? If it is shared by multiple fractions, then we will keep only the best fraction, which how to define the best fraction is we check how many measurements it has, and what's the largest intensity, what's the mean reported intensity. Based on this criteria, we select the best fraction and keep it. because we assume that different fraction, it should have complete different set of peptides, but sometimes we have the shared peptides across different fractions. That's why when we combine the fraction, we first filter out, we first deal with the shared peptides and then combine the fractions. Also, after the output from the converter, will no longer have the fraction information because the fraction is already combined here. So let's see what the output looks like. Oh, fashion. So it again exactly what the required input of protein summarization function: peptide, protein peptide sequence, and the charge, PSM, mixture, technical replicates, mixture, run channel condition. You can see there is no fraction column because we already combined the fraction in the converter. And the intensity here is the original scale. So next step, let's run the protein summarization function. Again, what's the protein summarization function have? In protein summarization function, three important. So first is the data, then we have it. The data is just the output from the converter. Three important options method. What method would you like to use for summarization? Here is MSSTATS. Default is MSSTATS. Because MSSTATMT performed the summarization and missing value imputation for each run separately. And then for each run, we can consider it as a label-free experiment. It has 10 replicates. So for each run, MSSTMT call MSSTATS to run the protein summarization and the missing value imputation. But you don't need to install MSSTATS here. It's automatically call it. But there are other options. You can also have MSSTMT also offer other options for summarization. One is the median polish, one is the median, and last one is log sum. You can try also these three. The difference between median polish and MSSTATS is the missing value imputation. First impute the missing value and then run median polish. The difference between median polish and MSSTATS is whether it does meet a missing value imputation. That's the protein summarization method. Then it's the normalization option. MSSTMT provides two normalization. One is the global normalization. Second is the reference normalization. Global normalization is, as Dr. Vitek described, it equalizes the median intensity across all the channels. It doesn't require on the spectral level, so it doesn't require reference channel. It's to account for the labeling efficiency between different channels. But at the same time, if you have the dataset has reference channel, we have another option for additional normalization, which is called reference-based normalization. It performs on protein level for each protein separately. So you can normalize the protein separately, individually based on the reference channel. It equalizes the reference channel across different MS runs. The first step is mainly to reduce the artifacts between different channels. But the second step focuses on the normalization between different MS runs, which is very important if you have multiple runs, especially if your design is unbalanced. This reference channel is helpful. Normalization is helpful. So let's try to run the protein summarization function. See the option I use. Here I use MSSTMT for summarization, but I didn't set the global normalization. Why? To use the global normalization, we need to be cautious is, first is the global normalization assumes each channel, it has equal amount of peptides or actually less. So, which means if you, sometimes we can observe that different channels indeed have different total amount of intensities because the biological reason, not because of technical reason or like labeling efficiency. At that time, for such scenario, you probably don't want to apply the global normalization because you don't want to remove your biological variation. Another point here is if your protein number is not very large, like the toy example here, I only gave you, it only has 50 proteins, which is very small proteins, number of proteins. And among the 50 proteins, there are specking proteins and the background proteins. So for such small number, we couldn't apply, we shouldn't apply global normalization because if you apply global normalization, then you will either make the background protein to have the specking pattern or make the specking protein to have the background pattern. Especially when I think it will make the background protein to follow the specking pattern. So global protein normalization need to apply to a larger number of proteins. And also you are sure that you are quite confident about the assumption. There's no, the total amount of abundance in intensities in each channel will not vary a lot across channel. Then you can apply the global normalization. Here, since the protein number is very small, I didn't apply. Then we can apply the reference normalization because we have the dataset has a reference channel. Also, the dataset is, because the reference channel normalization is based on, performed on each protein separately, so we can use it. There are two options: remove normalization channel or remove empty channel. It's just for the user convenience. After you perform the normalization, we don't need the reference normalization channel, so we can directly remove it from the output. But if you want to keep it, it's fine. You can just set it true. And again, sometimes we have the empty channel. Since there's no subject, no material in the channel, you can also here to see I want to remove the empty channel. Then let's run it. See, each time it runs, because we perform the summarization for each run separately, then it will call MSSTATS several times. Then after we perform the protein summarization, it will perform the normalization between run based on reference channel. There are totally 50 proteins. It do this normalization separately for each protein. So now what we have is a normalized protein summarization. What does it look like? We have run information, we have protein, we have abundance. So we have run, channel, condition, technical replicates, mixture. We still have all the annotation information. That's for sure, because we need it for the testing, for the following testing. But at the same time, we have a new column, which is abundance. That's the normalized log2 protein abundance. So after we have it, we can, what we can do is to, MSstatsTMT also provide a visualization tool for this quantification, for the normalized protein data. It's the protein process plot TMT function, similar like MSstatsTMT function name. In this function will give you a profile plot, which will looks like, let's see, which is something looks like we give you two PDF file. First is the this file. It has the profile for the peptide precursor. Each panel here is peptide is one single MS run, and each point within each run is one channel. So we have 15 runs, this data set, and we have 10, within each run, there are 10 channels. And each line here, different color means different precursor. We also label the group information on top of the panel. So there are 5 groups, and this is each, there are like fold concentration, specking concentration, and 1 normalization. That's the peptide information, peptide profile. At the same time, it will also output a second profile plot with the summarized protein information. Again, the gray dots here is the same as the peptide, the colored line in the previous PDF file profile plot. So the gray dots here is a feature level data, and the red dot here is the red dot here is the summarized and normalized data. If you run so that's the output from the function. In order to run this function, we need first the peptide level data as input PD, and also the normalized protein data. So give it peptide and the protein data. Then you can change the size of the file. Like if you have more run, you can make it wider, or you can make it higher. Also, you can give a specific name to the file. So let's run it. This step may take, I think within the MSSTMT package, this plus function takes the longest time, because imagine you have 5,000 proteins, it will generate 2 files. Each file has 2 PDF files. Each file has 5,000 pages. While we are running, I think I can answer a question. What will be the difference without the protein level normalization? Do we must have internal norm during sample processing? So I will show you. Actually, I will show you the results without protein level normalization, how it looks like. I think for us, if your design is balanced as this design, actually, in our evaluation, the difference is we use with or without the reference channel based normalization is not much. So, which means if your design is balanced, even you don't apply the normalization based, the reference channel based normalization, MSSTMT type modeling can still account the difference of the variation between runs. So you can still get similar results without, but the difference comes when the design is unbalanced. So at that time, we are in our internal evaluation is the reference channel based normalization will help the testing. Oh, I think we have a question is, can we use parallel to make MSSTMT work faster? Yes, actually, that's also what we are working on, because we do actually, when we do the summarization, when we do the normalization, we always do it like either separate each run separately or each protein separately. And this is a perfect scenario for the parallel computation. And we have someone in our group to work on it. But the parallel computation, the problem is because it depends on your local laptop setting or computer setting. It may be unstable sometimes or make the code crash. So for our basic MSSTATS current MSSTATS or MSSTMT version, we don't apply the parallel computation because we want to have some stable implementation, but we are working on it. So let's see the file looks like. We put the output file to PDF in the data folder. That's awesome. See, this file, it has 50 it has 50 pages. Each page is one protein. It's very useful because every time, most time when we perform testing, we found some conclusion for specific protein, especially if the protein conclusion is different from what you thought. Such as you think it's differential, but it's not. You expect it's differential, but the results tell you it's not. Then we want to know what happened. Most time you can find the answer from the profile plot. Maybe just because it's more noisy, there are more variants, or there's like a lot of missing value. So that's why it is identified as non-differential. So this will give you, also it can tell you how much missing value each protein has, and for example, how the normalization looks like. So then we have this profile plot visualization tool. Next, let's try to explore different options for the protein summarization and the normalization. And we will also use another profile plot to show the difference. So first we will run is, one thing is useful, it's because we know each time run the whole, produce the profile plot for all the protein. Actually, it kind of takes time, it's time consuming. Then if you have one particular protein, you can just make the profile plot for one specific protein. Okay, so you can tell which protein, give a protein ID here, then this profile plot we will only generate a single profile plot for one single protein. Oh, okay, it's not here. So it should be here. Then it's quite fast because it only generates a profile for one single protein. We will use this protein as an example to show different peptide, different protein summarization option, or different normalization function. So let's see what if we don't apply the normalization, reference level normalization, how it looks like. We run again the protein summarization function, but this time we set the reference channel normalization false. And again, this time we want to see how this same protein looks like without any normalization. We will run the same profile plot on this protein. Okay, but now this time the protein level data is without summarization. So let's see how it looks like. So this is the protein summarization without any normalization. So this is the protein summarization with reference channel normalization. You can see even the first three run actually the same the technical replicates of the same mixture. But if we don't apply any normalization, their intensity are quite different across runs. And that's how the reference channel normalization will make the channel, this two reference channel equal across all the run. Then that's the normalized data. So this show us how it looks like without any normalization. Then we can also see if we apply different summarization option. We can try, say, let's try a median summarization. So because median summarization, it doesn't apply like a missing value imputation, so it's very fast. And then again, we can see how the same protein change, the P3 5221. So that's the summarization. This time I didn't apply the normalization again. And then that's the summarization with median. That's a median summarization. If you I think you can probably see, for example, focus on this run, how it looks. This is summarize the value looks like. But with the two key median summary, like MSSTATS summarization, it looks like this. We know this protein is a background protein, so we expect that it had no difference or no change across all the channel at all the run. But there's always sometimes there's always like a labeling efficiency issue or like outliers. Then we need to a robust summarization. From this, for this particular protein, we can tell that now MSSTATS summarization is more robust than median summarization. Okay. So let's go to the last step, which is the most, what we want really interested in is the testing part. MSSTMT has the testing function as group comparison. It provides the group, you can compare any group, any combination of, the combination of any groups within the function. Inside the function, I think the attendee previously asked is, does MSSTMT apply lemma? The answer is yes. MSSTMT also applies similar thing like lemma. Because lemma, the idea in lemma is the empirical bias, which is we know we have multiple proteins, and the protein sometimes when the sample size is very small, then the variance can be very large because of small sample size. The empirical bias idea is we assume that all the protein variance, they follow a same prior information. Then we can borrow the information from all the proteins to estimate the prior information and moderated the variance. We apply a same idea to in MSSTMT. This option is provided in this moderated. Moderated is, do you want to apply use moderated test, or you want to just use the regular test? If you use if you set it yes, then MSSTMT will perform some. After we fit the linear model, we have the residual, we have all the variance components. We will also fit. We will also use all the variance from all the protein to fit the prior information, to estimate the prior information and apply it to each protein. Okay, that's the one thing is. Also, second option is a contrast matrix. Similar like MSSTATS is, if you want to compare something, you need to tell that the function what you want to compare. For example, in this case, we have 4 conditions. Which condition you want to compare? Do you want to compare concentration 1 with concentration 0.125 or something else? If you want to compare any 2 pairs of conditions, then you can just use a default pairwise. The default pairwise, give the default pairwise, then the function will generate it, all the 2 pairs, possible 2 pairs all the possible pairs of 2 conditions and perform testing. Okay. I think we have a question, is there any function to add clinical covariance in the regression model for comparison of conditions? I think the covariance you mean is like maybe different, currently we don't support, I see, okay, like age or gender. Current MSSTMT doesn't support it, I think, because in order to know this information, you need to tell it in the annotation file. So in our, now we have only, we have one format for the annotation file, so it doesn't have the age or gender column. So currently MSSTMT doesn't support this. Okay, so one thing is sometimes I always forgot is when we generate the output from protein summarization function, sometimes we don't because we don't want to compare with like condition 1 to the normalization channel, right? In the annotation, we said normalization is also one condition. Before we really perform the statistical analysis testing, we want to remove all the normalization channel. You can directly remove it within the protein summarization function, or you can do it manually here, just to filter out the condition, normalization condition. Let's run the code, run the testing function. We say we will just want to compare all the possible pairs of between two conditions, and we also want to do moderated because we have we want to see how it performs, and then so since we also want to adjust the multiple comparison, we use Benjamin Hatchberger one. You can also use other methods like FDR. Like a story one, but here we use the Benjamin Hatchberger one. Let's run it. So as you see, the output is we first fit the linear model for each protein, and then what we perform testing. Testing here is we will, based on the linear model, we will perform the pairwise comparison and apply the lemma like empirical bias. Now it's already done. Let's see how it looks like. Let's first check what's the possible, or what's the comparison in the, let's first see output, how the output looks like. Okay, that's the output have, it's the same format as MSSTATS. We have protein column, we have label column, we have log2, label is the comparison. This means we compare 0.125 to 0.5. And then we have log2 estimates and standard error of the log2 estimate, log2 for change, degree of freedom, p-value, adjusted p-value, and the issue. Issue column is also same as MSSTATS, is if you, NA means no problem for this, but if one protein such as it has only value in one condition and complete missing in another condition, then what we will tell you that one condition missing in the issue column. So you know that there's no p-value is because of the one condition is missing. In MSSTMT, we don't provide the visualization tool for the testing results. We provide the tool for the protein summarization output, but we can use the same protein plot, like visualization plot from MSSTMT, because the output format in MSSTMT, so we can use the same function from MSSTATS because the output, the testing output from MSSTMT is the same as in MSSTATS. You can directly call, if you want to use like the output like volcano plot or comparison plot from MSSTMT, what you need to do is, here you need to load the install MSSTATS in order to use the volcano plot function from MSSTMT, from MSSTATS. Then we can see, this is the function from MSSTATS, group comparison plot. And this is the output from MSSTMT. We will see we want a volcano plot, and the p-value, we want to log2 transform the p-value. And the protein name means we want to label each point in the volcano plot with the protein name. And then we have give a name for the volcano plot. So let's run it, okay? After we run it, we have the volcano plot. How it looks like will look like this. That's the, for each comparison, for each label, we have one plot. This plot is for comparison between 0.5 and 0.667. I see the colored, the blue colored means the differential abundant protein, and the gray dots here means like non-differential proteins. If we look at the differential abundant protein, you see it's all UPS, which That's how we distinguish is the background proteins and the specking protein. Specking protein has UPS in their name, which means this our normal we correctly identify all the UPS protein as significance, right? All the differential abundant proteins are UPS proteins, so all the true positives. And there is another group is also you can see comparisons between 0.125 and 0.5. Again, this is all the blue color means all the true positives, all the differential abundant proteins. All the differential abundant proteins. So another thing is interesting is we see that for this second comparison, the points, the position of the points is like a little bit upper than the first one. It's because if you see these two concentration, their fold change is smaller than the second comparison. Because the second comparison, the fold change is around, it's 4. And the first one is around 1 point, maybe 3. So then its p-value, like adjusted p-value is smaller than the second one because the fold change is smaller. Okay. Then I think for if you want to compare like more, not only just the pairwise, you want to compare maybe compare condition 1, 2 with condition 3, 4, then you have to do the same thing as in MSSTATS, give a contrast. So something like, for example, we have 4 conditions. Then you can say I want to compare condition 1. I want to condition 1, 2. Condition 1, 2 with condition 3, 4, then you can set like a 1, 1, minus 1, minus 1. And then we know you want to compare the first condition with the second condition. So if you want to perform more than pairwise comparison, then you need to give a contrast matrix as to the group comparison function. Okay, I think that's all the demo for the PD output. If you have a massive quant output, you can run the massive quant file I provide in the folder to try it. But I won't say it's all the following steps actually the same. Like for different tool, what's the difference? It's only about the converter. After converter, all the tool will generate the same format. So after the converter, then we don't know, actually it doesn't matter it's from PD or from massive quant. What the difference is how you prepare the input to the converter and how you prepare the annotation file for different tools. Yeah, so for the MSSTMT, similar, like we also provide the log file you can tell like what's the package version and what's the session information, like what's the input, like parameter you set for your reproducibility. Okay, and then I think we have question is, okay, I think that's all the demo for today. Now I can answer some questions about the MSSTMT. So one question is, how do you want me to first answer question or you? How do you determine differential abundant protein? Do you use fold change or just the p-value? So we, in the volcano plot, you can set, we will have, in the volcano plot, we have 2 criteria. One is fold change, log 2 fold change. One is adjusted p-value, not p-value, it's adjusted p-value. So you can set like what's the p-value, adjusted p-value you cut off you want. Usually it's 5%, and you can also set the fold change to log 2 fold change cutoff in the volcano plot. Do you want me, still there's a question? So there's another question is, when MSSTMT combines fractions into single measurements, what criteria are used to combine? Peptide sequence only or any other criteria such as precursor or other? So good question is, first is if we have one peptide shared by two fractions, we will check each fraction for this spectrum, for this peptide, how many value data points it has. We want to keep the fraction which has the most data points, which means it has the least missing value. And after that, if they all have the same number of data points, we want to see, okay, what's the mean intensity? What's the mean intensity across all the channels? We want to keep the largest fraction which has the largest mean intensity. We think it has a better data quality. Okay.
Well, thank you, Ting, very much. And thank you to everyone who stayed until the very end. It is clear that when the presentation becomes more technical, it is more difficult to follow, especially in this online format. So usually per our tradition at the May Institute, we would be walking between the desks and helping all of you individually working through these examples. But I hope that despite the online format, it was still very useful. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions about Massive Quant or about MSstatsTMT or about anything, as a matter of fact. So tomorrow we have a very exciting program. We have two presenters focusing on development of R-based tools. So we'll have a presentation by Lauren Gatto, who is the lead developer of MSN Base, and also a presentation of Kylie Bemis, who will be talking about the internals of Cardinal package. And so these presentations will be particularly useful to those of you who actually develop R-based tools, because they will be talking about the, all the backends and how they make the software stable and reusable, and how they use different abstractions to represent mass spectrometry data in the most effective way, including things such as working with data that do not fit in memory and how to work with the data on disk. So I hope that you will join us. And other than that, I would like to give a virtual round of applause to all the presenters today. And thank you very much. And thank you for staying on time. We all really appreciate that. So see you tomorrow.